Welcome to Health Activators with lifestyle medicine doctor, GP and longevity expert Dr. Alka Patel. This show will help you to discover a hidden health hacking code that unlocks your phenomenal potential for an outstanding health span, lifespan and wealth span. The show features candid conversations with celebrities, influencers and industry icons, real-life stories and cutting-edge health activating advice that other doctors might not tell you. Discover why now is the time to join the strategic self-care revolution and experience the profound effects this will have on your personal and professional success. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alka Patel.
Before we get into today's show, please do support today's show partner, Youth and Earth. Youth and Earth have a range of products that I love to use myself to supercharge my metabolism, to support my health, and to slow down cellular aging. Just be sure you click the link in the show notes for exclusive offers which Youth and Earth are so generously giving for listeners of this show. Hi, hey, and hello, Health Activators. Welcome to another week, all ready to unlock your health hacking code in 3 steps by making decisions with precision using data and devices. Now, on today's show, as always, I am asking 1 question, reviewing 2 references, and giving you 3 hacks so that activating your health is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Today, I am exploring the science of generosity. And the 1 question that I'm answering is, how can I be more generous? Now, why am I talking about this? Well, on last week's show, I was chatting to the incredibly generous Lisa Allen. Lisa's from the charity Pink Ribbon Foundation. And simply listening to her living and breathing through her generosity in her work and in the way that she lives her life is what's then prompted me to take a look into the fascinating world of generosity. But not only that, because when I ran the London Marathon a few weeks ago, what I was so deeply moved by was the sheer generosity of people. People who lined the streets, generously giving their time, the runners, so generously giving their energy, all running with a meaning in their hearts, and so many people generously giving their money to support charities. Generosity, well, it fascinates me, so I am super excited to dive into this topic with you all today. So what will I be doing? Well, I'll be looking at what generosity is. Is it innate? Is it genetic? Is there even a nice gene? And can it be learned? And I'll be exploring why generosity matters and also looking at what makes people generous and what goes on in your brain and with your biochemistry as well when you are generous. And of course, as always, I'll be looking at how you can use data and devices to support your journey as well. So let's get going. Let's start off with what is generosity. So generosity, well, it is like that glitter of the human spirit, isn't it? It's that quality that makes you want to spread a little extra sparkle into the world. No, I'm not talking about giving away your last square of chocolate, because of course that is in itself the most noblest of acts. But what generosity is the selfless act of giving without expecting anything in return. So it's a bit like being Santa Claus, minus the red suit and minus the cookie addiction. Giving without expectation of return. It's a feel, not a deal. Now, the burning question is whether generosity is innate in all humans. Are we all born with a natural inclination to be kind and giving? Well, studies do suggest that generosity might just be in our DNA. Imagine that. It's like we're all walking around with tiny little generosity genes that go, hey there, be kind, be giving, and you will make the world a better place. But just to be super clear here, we don't have a nice gene specifically. It isn't like there's a gene out there labeled GFT2, generosity factor 2, that will determine if you're going to be Mother Teresa or Scrooge. But the reason that I say it's in your DNA is because generosity is part of your survival mechanism. So if you go back to your ancestral days, back to our ancestral days, being generous and being kind meant that you got to sleep in the cave with your fellow tribe members rather than being ousted outside to sleep with the lions. And it is generosity and the emotional connect that comes from it that's kept the human species connected. And what research does suggest is that generosity is indeed innate in humans. It's rooted in our evolutionary history and it's connected to our survival as a species. And of course, in ancestral times, all that cooperation and reciprocal altruism, well, it played crucial roles in ensuring survival of very early human communities. And there's been lots of studies on this. There's an interesting study that highlights the innate nature of generosity. So this particular study was conducted by Michael Tomasello. He's a developmental psychologist at Duke University in North Carolina. And in his work, what he did was study the behavior of young children to really investigate their natural inclinations towards helping others. So in this particular study, what was involved was observing children, and they were as young as 14 months old. And what the researchers found was that even at such an early age, children did display very spontaneous acts of helping and sharing and cooperation without any external prompts or rewards. So what does this suggest? Well, it suggests that there is in us an innate tendency towards pro-social behavior. And pro-social behavior includes generosity, and this starts from a very early stage in human development. So, of course, while there is no specific generosity gene that we have discovered yet, the expression of genes related to pro-social and generous behaviors has got other influences, what we call epigenetic factors. So epigenetics, what is that? Well, epigenetics is the change in your gene expression, which is caused by environmental influences rather than alterations in your underlying DNA sequence. It's all about your environment and its impact on how your genes show up. So again, if we look at the research, what we know is that experiences, upbringing, social environments, they all shape gene expression patterns related to empathy and altruism and generosity. So, well, for example, some studies have shown that experiencing kindness and nurturing in your childhood then leads to upregulation of genes associated with generous behavior. And these should, in theory, last throughout adulthood. But then what happens as we move into adult life, what we often see is that very innate nature of generosity gets concealed. It gets inhibited by modern living. So things like the busyness of day-to-day life in this very 24/7 world that we're now in, things like societal pressures, cultural norms, these can all dampen your innate generosity. And they can then influence how generosity is expressed and valued in different contexts that you find yourself. And there's also this sense of this competitive nature in the modern society of today, and that focus on individual success that also is starting to overshadow your innate inclination towards generosity. So yes, generosity is innate in everyone. Every single one of you listening is generous at your very core. But it is also influenced by a range of other factors, from your upbringing to your experiences and the environment that you're in as well. So think of generosity as a combination of nature meets nurture. So thinking about nature then, in terms of nature, what about personality? Well, it turns out that there are 5 big personality traits that influence how likely you are to lend a helping hand. And it seems that generosity isn't just a once-only event, it's ingrained into your persona. So let me give you 5 generous personality traits and just think about which one resonates with you. So there's agreeableness. Agreeable folks, they've got compassion and empathy, and they're very naturally inclined to be generous. So if you're the kind of person who always has a shoulder available to lean on, who's always got a caring word for those around you, then you really do have a great big heart. Agreeable folks, they're the ones who will be knitting blankets for kittens and organising bake sales for a good cause. They'll be spreading kindness like confetti. So that's agreeableness. Then there's openness. Are you the curious, imaginative type who's always up for trying new things? Well, guess what? Your openness might just be fueling your generous spirit. So open individuals tend to embrace diverse perspectives and ideas. They're the ones who very easily put themselves in someone else's shoes, and they understand different points of view. So they'll be the ones brainstorming innovative solutions, coming up with out-of-the-box ideas to tackle social issues. They see possibilities where others see roadblocks. And this openness to the world is what makes them more inclined to be generous and extend that helping hand. And then there's another very interesting personality trait, neuroticism. What? Neuroticism can be a generosity trait. Oh yes, it is true. Neurotic people are self-aware. And they can be productive individuals who channel their anxious energy into acts of kindness, constantly striving to make a difference in the world. Because when you're in touch with your own emotions, it enables you to notice emotions in others as well. So this awareness and this self-awareness can be a recipe for generosity. Neurotic people, well, think of it this way. They're like the superheroes of generosity. They're battling their own worries while saving the day for others. Fourth personality trait is conscientiousness. Are you the organized, responsible type who likes to get things done? Well, guess what? Your conscientiousness extends way beyond just being reliable, because it can also make you a more generous person. So people who are high in conscientiousness tend to keep their promises and they keep their commitments, and that includes commitments to giving. So if that is you, then go ahead, tick off generosity on your to-do list. And finally, extroversion. So if you're the life of the party, always ready to socialize, and you cannot resist striking up a conversation with strangers, then you might just have a very generous streak. Extroverts tend to thrive on human interaction, and that very outgoing nature is what often then translates into acts of generosity. So if that's you, then just keep mingling and spingling and spread those good vibes with your enthusiastic infection. No, with your infectious enthusiasm. That's what I meant. So thinking about those traits, what would you say is your strongest trait out of these 5? And how then can knowing your dominant trait help you to donate more of your time, talents, and treasures? Well, it's all about finding the right fit. So if you're an extrovert, look for opportunities to get involved in group activities or events. If you're an agreeable person, well, consider donating to causes that really align with your personal values. If you're conscientious, make a regular habit of giving. Whatever that is, a small amount each month or volunteering your time once a week. And really remember, of course, as I've said, these traits are just part of the puzzle. When it comes to generosity, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, and everyone's generosity is shaped by their own unique blend of traits and experiences and values. So whether you're an outgoing extrovert, a compassionate, agreeable, a responsible, conscientious, a self-aware, stable soul, or an open-minded explorer, there is room for generosity in your own way. Now, you might be wondering, but why? Why does generosity even matter? And as a giver, what are the benefits of being generous? Well, firstly, and probably the most obvious, is improved psychological well-being. When you experience a sense of purpose and fulfillment and positive emotions through acts of generosity, it contributes to your own psychological well-being with much better emotional health. Generosity is like winning the lottery of happiness. But the fun does not stop there, because generosity also does a little dance with your heart. What studies have shown is that when you're kind and giving, it can lower your blood pressure and reduce your stress levels. There's a study published in the journal Health Psychology, and what this revealed was that adults who volunteered for at least 200 hours a year, they were less likely to develop high blood pressure. So think about that. Helping others can help keep your blood pressure in check. It's like a free workout for your cardiovascular system. So next time that you're feeling a little overwhelmed and under pressure, skip the crisps and instead go lend someone a helping hand instead. Your heart will thank you, and so will the world. And there's also a link between generosity and longevity, because it turns out that being generous can add a few years to your life. What researchers have found is that people who engage in acts of generosity tend to have, as I said, lower levels of stress and depression, but they also live longer than those who are perhaps hoarding their kindness. So think of generosity as that elixir of life. And on that, there was a study that was published in the American Journal of Public Health, and it found that people who regularly gave their time to others had a lower risk of mortality. So the next time then that you're pondering whether to binge watch Netflix or not, or lend a helping hand, think about that potential fountain of youth that generosity could be creating for you. So where are we at? Well, now you know the benefits of generosity and have every reason to live a more generous life. The question is, can generosity be learned? Can you learn to be more generous? And the simple answer to that is absolutely yes, because generosity is like a skill that you can just sharpen with practice, like learning to juggle or perfecting your dance moves in front of the mirror. And yes, we have all been there. And what studies have shown is that acts of generosity, what they do is they rewire your brains. They create positive feedback loops that make you want to give even more. It's like a never-ending cycle where giving feels so good that you can't help but do it again and again. Looking at studies, well, a study published in the Journal of Nature Communications found that when participants engaged in acts of generosity for several weeks, they experienced changes in their brain activity associated with happiness. So the more you flex your generosity muscle, the stronger that it gets. But why is that? What happens in your head and your heart when you are being generous? Well, let's now turn to the science a bit. So when it comes to understanding the neural basis of generosity, there's several key brain regions and neurotransmitters that are involved in the process. So one of the main brain regions associated with generosity is called the ventral striatum. The ventral striatum, that's a part of your brain's reward system. And this region is responsible for processing pleasurable experiences. So you know that rush of excitement that you get when you find maybe an unexpected £20 note in your pocket? Well, that is the same brain region associated with receiving rewards that light up when you engage in the acts of generosity. It's like your brain is shouting, jackpot, hey, generosity is the winning ticket. And another brain region that is also linked to generosity is the prefrontal cortex, more specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC. And this region is more specifically involved in decision-making and self-control and moral judgments. And what it does is it helps you weigh the pros and cons of your actions, and it helps you to make choices that align with your values. So when you engage in generous behaviors, the DLPFC becomes more active. It guides you towards altruistic actions, and it overrides any, say, selfish impulses. So think of it like that voice of reason, which is just simply saying, hey, think about the greater good. So that's brain regions. What about the chemicals that work behind the scenes that make generosity feel so good? Well, let's talk about neurotransmitters and hormones. So when you engage in acts of generosity, this triggers the release of those feel-good chemicals in your brain. And I've talked about them many times on this show, your daily dose neurochemicals, DOSE, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. So generosity, you've had this feeling before. It feels like your brain is throwing a party and all those happy neurotransmitters are invited. So the more you give, the more that these chemicals flood your system and the happier and more fulfilled you feel. So let's look at each of these. Dopamine is associated with reward and pleasure, and it comes into play when you're being generous. It's very much your brain's own motivation and reinforcement system. So when you engage in acts of generosity and you experience those positive outcomes and rewards, that's dopamine being released, creating that sense of satisfaction and encouraging you to continue to be generous. Then oxytocin, which is often referred to as your love hormone or your cuddle chemical. And oxytocin is released during social bonding, during trust building, during acts of kindness and generosity. And what it does is it enhances your feelings of empathy and it promotes social connections. So picture this, you decide to donate to a charity. And as you click that donate button, you feel this very warm, fuzzy sensation in your chest. Well, that is not the remnants of last night's pizza. It is the release of oxytocin. And what studies have shown is that acts of generosity trigger the release of oxytocin. So when you're being generous, oxytocin is what is giving you that warm, fuzzy feeling, and it's strengthening your bond with others. Think of it like a hug in chemical form. Then there's serotonin. Serotonin is your feel-good neurotransmitter. The higher your serotonin levels, the more positive your emotional state. And then, of course, this positive emotional state then influences your behaviors and your actions, which include acts of generosity. So one experiment that's been done was actually manipulated serotonin levels using serotonin-enhancing drugs. So this particular study was a double-blind placebo-controlled experiment published in the journal Science. So in this experiment, one group were given a serotonin-boosting drug and another group were given a placebo, which didn't change serotonin levels. And neither group knew which one they had received. That's the double-blind part. And what the study found was that those with more serotonin, they had increased levels of generosity. They exhibited increased generosity and a willingness to share compared to those who received the placebo. And finally, endorphins. Endorphins are natural opioid-like substances, and they're produced by your nervous system. So they're known to have an analgesic effect. So they reduce pain, and they also promote feelings of well-being. And they're released in many situations in response to a variety of stimuli, things like exercise and laughter and social interactions. And when it comes to generosity, endorphins play a very significant role in motivating and rewarding generous behaviors. So those acts of giving and helping others and engaging in altruistic actions, they've been found to trigger the release of endorphins, which then leads to positive emotional states. And when you engage in generous behaviors, things like donating money or volunteering a time, you experience an increase in endorphin levels. This endorphin release then leads to helper's high. Helper's high. You know, that feeling of euphoria. And one study which was conducted at the University of Oxford, it looked at that relationship between endorphins and generosity. So in this study, the participants were asked to play a game in which they could choose to share money with others or keep it for themselves. And what the study found was that those who chose to share money, they had increased endorphin levels compared to those who kept the money for themselves. Which really means that endorphins, they act as a biological mechanism to reinforce rewards and generous behavior. And also what endorphins do is contribute to the social bonding aspect of generosity. So with generosity, both the giver and the recipient experience an increased sense of connection and bonding. And it's the release of endorphins during these very generous interactions that then strengthen those social bonds and enhance empathy and trust as well. So that's neurochemicals. What about hormones? Let's not forget about hormones because they've got a much more complex role in generosity. Take testosterone, for example, which you might think of as being more of a dominance and aggression type of hormone, and it might seem like quite an unlikely player in the realm of generosity. But turns out that studies have found that higher levels of testosterone are linked to increased generosity. And there's also cortisol, your stress hormone. So on one hand, very high levels of cortisol do inhibit generosity because stress, well, it really narrows your focus and leaves more to self-preservation. But on the other hand, moderate levels of cortisol promote generosity by enhancing your empathic responses. So if you look at this overall, that neural basis of generosity, it involves a very delicate interplay between brain regions, between neurotransmitters, between hormones as well. So, as I said, there's your ventral striatum and your prefrontal cortex, and they guide your decisions and reward you for acts of generosity. And then you get a dose of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, which provide you that feel good, all those feel good sensations that make generosity so fulfilling. And then you add testosterone and cortisol into the mix, and they add their own complexities in, influencing your proclivity for giving. So then next time that you feel a surge of warmth and joy in your heart when you engage in an act of generosity, just remember to thank your brain for what's going on up there. So let's just recap then to where we've got to so far, because you now know what generosity is: giving without expectation. You understand that generosity is an innate part of being human, and it's also shaped by your environment, which in turn influences your epigenetics. We've explored generous personality traits, and you also know now why generosity matters from a health, well-being, and longevity perspective. You know the science behind generosity in terms of neurobiochemistry, and you know that you can learn to be more generous. So how do you do that? How do you learn to be more generous? Well, let's just shift gears here then and talk about data and devices. So in this era of advanced technology, you do have access to a wealth of information that can help you become more generous and make a greater impact. So let's think about data. When it comes to data, understanding your own giving patterns and your generosity traits really can be a game changer. And as I said, whilst there aren't any specific gene tests or proxy blood markers that can directly measure generosity, there are certain avenues of data that can give you some understanding. So here's 3 key data points. Firstly, personality assessments. Undertake your own personality assessment. So when it comes to generosity, the Big 5 inventory is a great tool to provide insight into your individual personality traits. And as I've mentioned earlier, agreeableness, openness, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and extroversion, those 5 big personality traits, are linked to different aspects of generosity. So assess those, because assessing your personality traits can help you to understand how these traits then influence your charitable, generous inclinations. So what I will do is I'll put a link in the show notes to the Big 5 inventory that I'll put into my blog that goes with this episode, so that then you can take that personality assessment directly. Okay, second data point is self-reflection and journaling. So keep a journal and engage in self-reflection, because this can help you explore your thoughts and your emotions and your experiences related to generosity. So if you examine your past acts of kindness and motivation and the impact that they've had on you, you can then gain a much more deeper understanding of your own generosity traits and your patterns. So start journaling. As you're writing, focus on generosity. And third point, which is in keeping with that, is behavioral tracking. So track your giving behaviors, because this will tell you a lot about your generosity. Keep a record. Track your donations, track your volunteer hours, track your acts of kindness, however small they may be, and see the impact that you're making. Because what this will also do is help you to identify your patterns and your preferences, and then those areas where you might want to focus your generosity efforts even more. So then, when it comes to data, capture your generosity data through a personality assessment and through journaling and through behavior tracking. Be your own generosity detective and uncover those hidden gems in your philanthropic journey. And let's not forget about devices, because there are platforms and apps and websites that provide insights and suggestions for giving opportunities that can be then tailored to your own personal interests. So let me just give you some examples of giving your time, talents, or treasures. What sorts of devices, platforms, apps, websites, etc. might be useful for that. So there are, firstly, crowdfunding platforms. So crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe or Kickstarter, what they do is they provide this digital space where you can support other people's causes and projects or even individuals in needs. So these platforms let you contribute financially to a huge range of initiatives. So it makes it really easy to engage in charitable giving. Then there are donation apps as well. There's lots of apps which are designed to really streamline that donation process, make it easy. Things like Charity Navigator, which helps you find reputable charities. Another one is GiveWell, which evaluates and then recommends effective charities. And these apps, what they do is they give you information about organizations, about their impact, about their transparency, on their financial stewardship, so that you can really make much more informed donation decisions. And there's social impact apps. So what social impact apps do is they combine generosity with social connections and gamification as well. So it creates a much more fun and engaging giving experience. So something like Share the Meal, well, it's an app that allows you to donate to provide meals to those in need. And it also at the same time tracks the collective impact of users. And what this then does is create this sense of community, which makes giving a much more interactive and rewarding experience as well. What else? Well, there are volunteer matching platforms. So websites like Volunteer Match and ID List, they help you to connect with volunteer opportunities that really align with your interests and your skills. So it makes it easier for you to find voluntary work, engage in voluntary work, whether that's local community or globally as well. Going on a level, philanthropic advising platforms. So if you're in strategic philanthropy or you want to seek guidance on very effective giving, then there's platforms like Bright Funds or Impact Matters that can offer much deeper insights as well. And again, thinking about corporates as well, many companies have got their own giving platforms and giving programs as well. And sometimes it allows employees to contribute to charitable causes and provide a matching program where then companies can match their employees' donations as well, which effectively then doubles the impact of generosity. And finally, things like online fundraising events. So platforms like Just Giving, which you have probably heard of, or even Facebook fundraisers. It allows you as an individual to create fundraising campaigns for things like special occasions or personal challenges or in memory of a loved one. And these events then provide a very easy way to rally friends and family and the social networks to contribute to a cause that you care about. So you can see how with just a few taps on your phone or on your keyboard, you can make a difference in someone's life. It's generosity at the speed of light. So finally, to draw us to a close, let me give you 3 hacks on how to be more generous with your time, and with your talents, and with your treasures. So number 1, a hack to be more generous with your time is to create a schedule or set aside specific blocks of time that you dedicate to acts of generosity. So treat these time slots as non-negotiable commitments, just like you would with any other important appointment or task, whether it's volunteering at a local organization or helping a friend or family member with a project, or simply spending quality time with a loved one. Consciously allocating time for your generosity just helps to ensure that it becomes a regular part of your routine. Number 2 is a hack for being more generous with your talents. So to be more generous with your talents, simply pause and think about, first of all, what are your skills? What is your expertise? Identify those areas where you excel or have specialized knowledge, and then find opportunities to share them with those who can benefit. This might involve teaching a workshop or a class. It might involve mentoring someone in your field. By using your talents to help others, you can make a meaningful impact. And hack number three on how to be more generous with your treasures. Now here I want to share my own personal favorite treasure. It's giving the greatest gift I believe that we all have, which is giving the gift of life. What do I mean, giving the gift of life? I mean donating your blood. Donating blood is a very special thing to do. So if you're able to, then go do that. Just 30 minutes of your time can significantly impact and even save up to 3 lives. What an incredible gift that is. What about organ donation? Is that something that you've thought about? Have a conversation with your family. Can you give after you've gone? So what I'll do is I'll pop some links up for blood and organ donation in the UK in the show notes. So wherever else you are in this world listening, please do also check your local services as well. And if you'd like me to answer any questions or support you with finding any local services or have any specific things that you want to ask, then do please reach out to me. You can message me on the socials at Dr. Alka Patel UK, or you can email me lifestylefirst@dralkapatel.com. So there we have it, my generous friends. As we conclude this episode, exploring the science of generosity and answering the question, how can I be more generous? Just remember that generosity is a remarkable trait, and it resides within each and every one of you. Generosity has the power to transform lives, to bring joy, to create a ripple effect of kindness in our world. So go forth and unleash your inner generosity and make this world a brighter and more compassionate place, one act of generosity at a time. I wish you a health-activating day.